Hi everyone, I'm Teresa Marzoff with Culture Engineered, and I am here with you today with your weekly update. And this month we're focusing on hiring and answering some of the most commonly asked questions from our clients. So today the question we're asking, or answering rather, is should I incorporate background checks into my hiring process? So let's get started. This, unfortunately, is not as easy of an answer as I would like, and I'll be honest, this isn't even my favorite topic. This is very tactical in nature, but it's a really important question. So I think the best way to approach this, and how we always approach it with our clients, is really going through some pros and cons, and then at the end we'll go through the culture engineer approach to deciding how to approach background checks for your company. So first, some pros to this process. One of the main pros is the ability of background checks to help the company defend against any type of accusations associated with reckless hiring. So for instance, let's say that you have a lot of employees driving on your company's behalf. And so as part of your hiring process, you want to verify that they have a history that suggests they're a safe driver. So to do that, you go and have driving, you pull part of your background check is running their driving history and verifying that they don't have any, outstanding issues on their license, that they do have a license, all that good stuff. So that would help you significantly if that employee were to get in an accident on company time in your vehicle, in your company vehicle. That would help you defend against any accusations that, oh, this is a reckless driver. You're doing kind of your due diligence as the employer. So this tends to be one of the preferable ways for companies to minimize any risk they have with, unfortunately, incidents that do happen. Another very popular reason is to quickly identify integrity issues. So in 2018, there was a Hire Right survey that was done, and it showed that 84% of employers found candidates, job candidates, to be lying either in the interview process or on their application or maybe resume. And they identified that through their background check. So this might have been a criminal aspect of their background check. This might have been a reference check. Maybe they were lying about their education. There's a lot more to this report, obviously, than they shared initially. But nonetheless, it is fair to assume, and a lot of employers do assume, that if someone is dishonest and deceitful in the hiring process, they will be dishonest and deceitful throughout their employment relationship. So this is a really great way that companies have quickly identified integrity issues where perhaps their hiring process hasn't already flushed that out. And then the third pro that we'll talk today is really actually ensuring the safety of a company's employees and customers. So, well, the first pro we talked about was more about minimizing liability. This is more about the actual impact. So let's say, for instance, you are hiring customer service representatives, and your customer service representatives have access to customers' addresses, they have access to their credit card information, to their social security information, a lot of pretty important information. So you may feel that it's very important to run background checks on your folks to ensure that they don't have any fraudulent criminal activity that would suggest they are likely to do damage to your customer base, or maybe an HR professional and you find that they have some fraud on their background. So you don't want to put that person in charge of seeing all employee social security numbers and date of birth and a lot of really private information. So again, this is another step that you can use as an employer to ensure the safety of those that you rely on and serve, being your employees and customers. So now let's flip it a little bit. Let's talk about some cons. One of the cons, we talked a lot about legal benefits of background checks, but lately the legal dangers are trending. So ban the box laws are one of these representations. Ban the box laws are really laws that look to minimize the amount of questions companies can ask about criminal history as just an auto determination factor. So if you have a box that indicate this is to certify I don't have any felonies or misdemeanors on my background check in the past 7 years or something of that nature, and it's now, at the time of shooting this video, 33 states have laws prohibiting this box, this application, because what companies historically have done is use this to automatically, yes pile, no pile. The no pile is anyone who has indicated, yes, they have some criminal history without giving any details or really taking into consideration how that's relevant to the job at hand. So it can be when you don't have the experience or even guidance around this process, you could actually be putting yourself in more jeopardy than it's worth by asking the question inappropriately based on laws in your area. It's not just state laws. There's been some counties and cities that have enacted this as well. So again, something to be mindful of. And one of the reasons of this is they were finding, courts were finding disparate impact, which is really realizing that there are certain groups where maybe criminal activity is at a higher percentage than other groups. So by using those same standards in your business, you're kind of perpetuating this injustice, although maybe not intentionally, is still causing other groups to not be represented in your workplace because you're perpetuating an already flawed population. So again, whether you agree with it or not, that's the background of the ban the box activity. There's a lot of activity behind it, so it's something to be aware of. One of the reasons I like to caution employers on, and this is a con of the background checks, is a lot of times then companies use that as kind of a crutch. So, you get someone's background check after hire, and then really nothing from that point forward. So you kind of let your guard down, if you will. This can be really dangerous. So that can be in the hiring process. If this is really the only way that you're kind of allowing your interviewing managers to identify integrity issues, or this is the only thing that you're really depending on to tell you whether or not someone is an ethical, hardworking person, this can be very dangerous, especially for small businesses. So there was a study done by University of Cincinnati, and it showed while 64% of small businesses said they had experienced some type of employee fraud or theft, only 16% actually reported it, and even less pursued charges beyond that. So now looking at, okay, if that's your number one concern in incorporating background checks is to eliminate fraud, this isn't really working because a lot of companies just don't feel, one, you're going to get the money back from that individual and that it's worth the legal hassle. You're employing the attorney. You're really pushing that, driving that forward. I have a client right now that's going through this very same process. The employee stole what they estimate to be about $500,000, and they're looking at a whole slew of legal fees in addition to the already very, very timely process. It's been at least 3 years that they've been pursuing this, and it's just getting uglier and uglier. So something to consider on both sides of that. One, those charges likely wouldn't show on someone's background check simply because they're not there. And on a reference check, most employers aren't going to want to put themselves in jeopardy unless they have to. And there are some times that they have to in sharing that information with you as a future employer. So a lot of times these types of integrity issues go undetected, and that can be very dangerous if that's what you're depending on to help weed out unethical folks from joining your team. And then the last thing we'll talk about here before we get into how to move forward is the administrative burden. So there is a lot, because background checks are done under the Federal Credit Reporting Act. There are a lot of notifications and back and forth administrative processes that are part of the background check process. So you really have to have someone knowledgeable about that and to really own that process in order for it to be effective. Otherwise, if you're just kind of going through it willy-nilly, kind of fast and loose, you're going to pay the price. And many large companies have. Companies like Domino's or Kmart, Swift Transportation, all have been sued for over $1 million in lawsuits, if not multi-million-dollar lawsuits, simply for failing to notify employees or candidates of their rights associated with background checks. And really, that's paper. It's just notifying them back and forth, showing them that you did your due diligence under the Federal Credit Reporting Act. So pretty important to know. So now let's talk about the culture engineer approach. So if you're still not sure whether or not background checks are right for you, I have a couple tips to get you started and to think about this process. First is identify your goal. So there was a report that was done in 2018 by a National Association of Background Screeners, so keep that in mind as we talk about it, but nonetheless, still some good information. 86% of employers say that their number one reason is to protect customers and employees. That's their number one reason for incorporating a background check in their hiring process. So if that's your number one goal, look to make sure that that's how you're approaching it. So what are you looking for when you do a background check? Are you doing criminal? Are you doing reference? And then how much does it work? Or if you're doing, we already talked about a lot of issues that you're likely worried about on your customer and employee's behalf, go unreported. Are you worried just about violent offenses? Are you worried just about recent offenses? What specifically is it that is your goal in incorporating a background check? And go from there. And then the second step is identify what positions to check and how. So you shouldn't have the same process for every employee in your organization. It should really depend on how it relates to that role that they're applying for. Otherwise, you're going to get into some trouble. So identify, not everyone needs a clean driving background. If they're not driving on your behalf, who cares? Not everyone, is a risk if they have some fraud in their background, or maybe if they have drug charges, which come up a lot. How does that impact their ability to do the job? You're really going to have to think that through, and we'll talk more about that. Step number 3 then is determine the rationale when issues arise, because they will. You will be shocked at how much information you get in a background check. Specifically criminally, we'll talk next week about drug screening, but you get a lot of information, and a lot of times candidates don't realize how much you get. For instance, a lot of candidates think it's only 7 years back. I've received background checks with charges of 20 to 30 years back. I've received background checks with expunged or kind of removed charges still showing on their background check. Or a lot of people don't realize, they think, oh, when I did community service, I had that removed from my background. Instead, it was reduced. I had a guy collected unemployment and was found to be collecting unemployment, without cause, without reason. He should have been collecting unemployment. They charged him with a felony every time he cashed his check. He had 10 felony charges on his background check, and they reduced it to just 1. But every single one still showed as a dismissed charge. But it still showed up. He was shocked. So really know how that's going to work, because you're going to get a lot of information and you're going to have to make some pretty tough decisions. So be prepared, create some structure in the beginning. In November of 2012, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or EEOC, provided some great guidance. It's very detailed, but there's really 2 steps to their guidance. First is look for what are or apply green factors. So you're looking at the severity of the offense, the gravity of the offense, how long ago the offense took place, how long ago they were released from prison, and then how it relates to the job. And then once you kind of do that, then go and do an actual individual assessment. And although there needs to be some consistent rationale, it's an individual assessment. So this can get a little complex, but nonetheless, that's their guidance on how to flesh these issues out rather than using broad brushstrokes, the same rules for everybody. This is where companies get in trouble. Can't be the same rules for everybody as far as no felonies, no misdemeanors, nothing within the last year, you know, a parole violation charge versus sexual assault charge is going to be very different likely as to how it relates to a job. And then the 4th step is ensure one person or department owns the administrative process. Don't be one of these folks that's doing all the right things but fails to act on the administrative piece, giving notifications, keeping a timely record of that, doing the back and forth with the job candidate. You really want someone to own that entire process that can keep it confidential, use some reasonable rationale, but at the same time very knowledgeable of the company's responsibilities as this process goes, because that can catch you up. So really own that whole process. And then the 5th step is always assess whether or not it's working. Are you still having integrity issues show up? Are you, maybe not allowing, are your rules too strict? You're not allowing certain folks, second chances. Really assess whether or not that's working and helping you, attract the type of candidates that work best in your company, because it oftentimes is short-sighted. It's oftentimes, it doesn't serve your overall initial goal, and you have to kind of reevaluate your approach. So hopefully these help you get started. Reach out to Culture Engineered if you have any additional questions or needs on your hiring process. Otherwise, we'll be back next week when we talk about whether or not you should drug screen as part of your hiring process.